There's only been one big story in town this week, and if you've tried to get petrol, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are forecourts where people are fighting. There are forecourts where people are pulling knives on one another. Who is to blame, and how are we going to fix it? This is the Political Punch-Up. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by two stalwarts of any argument. Howard Cox from Fair Fuel UK, Emma Webb, of course, a political commentator, Conservative commentator, and I want to get both of you a very, very warm welcome here to the Political Punch-Up. Emma, let me start with you. Tell me, do the public have to take the blame for this petrol crisis?
I think the public have to take part of the blame for this for a number of reasons. Although ultimately I don't think it's necessarily their fault. I think part of the reason that there has been all of this panic buying is because of the way that it was reported. So earlier this week, news was broken about the fact that possibly the Road Haulage Industry Association may have leaked partial information to ITV that did an exclusive on this, where they leaked information from a BP executive who had said that there was a shortage in fuel at their petrol stations, but actually it meant that only one in thousands of their stations were actually closed at any one time. But then once this had been reported, by Sunday 30% of their fuel courts were closed, and it was partly because of the fact that the public, despite being told not to, went out and started panic buying. And I saw this firsthand. My dad was trying to fill up his vans for his company to be able to operate and couldn't get any because people were panic buying fuel. So the public obviously have to bear some of the responsibility for this, but I think that the responsibility overall lies in a number of different places. It's just a perfect storm, but certainly the public have aggravated it.
Howard Cox, what's your view of the situation?
Well, I tend to agree with what you've just said, but the most important, I think 80% of the reason we're in this situation is because the government are fully to blame. It was a madness that Grant Shapps stood up and said, simply don't panic. What's that going to do to the public? I mean, we had that problem with the toilet roll situation in the COVID. Everyone panicked on that, went out to buy toilet rolls. The point I'm trying to get across is the government are fully to blame for not acting quickly enough on the warnings that have been given to them for the last 15 years from the RHA. You mentioned the RHA leak that. The leak is supposed to come from a particular executive who actually wasn't even at that meeting. I don't know where this rumour is coming from, but the RHA have been calling on the government to actually try and get the HGV driver shortage sorted for 15 years. And I've been backing them on this front. So many skilled tanker drivers are leaving to take up jobs at supermarkets who are offering signing on fees and salaries. But then we hear this virtual signalling thing about the army are on standby by the government. That also causes panic from people. What the hell is that going to be? There are only about 100 drivers shortages on this tanker, just 100 drivers. The 100,000 figure is for the whole country regarding the HGV driver shortage. In terms of tankers, all they needed to do is put the army out. There are tankers all full of diesel, full of petrol refineries, put the army bums on seats, HGV drivers on seats, and that would have been sorted straight away.
Now, what I can tell both of you is that I think there's no point to having this show if you're both going to agree. So you're going to have to find some point of disagreement. Otherwise, the Political Punch-Up ain't a punch-up at all. But here's what I would say. I think what would have been the smartest thing to do would have been to put a limit on both upper and lower amounts of fuel that you could get, because I myself went to an empty petrol station on Sunday evening because they had a £30 maximum buy, right? Now, if you do that all over the country and a minimum buy of 20, then surely people will not fill up their cars and there will be not a shortage of petrol. And so, Emma, in the end, you can only blame the public, can't you?
Well, actually, I know someone I know told me that they saw a woman filling up her 4x4 with £7 of petrol because she just kept going back to top it up. But I do think, to counter what was just said there, I don't think it's fair to say this is entirely the government's fault. Yes, they could have seen this coming down the line. There is a HGV driver shortage all across Europe, huge numbers. In Poland, it's over 100,000 drivers short. In Germany, in Italy, in France, they also have a HGV driver shortage. And there are a number of reasons for this. One of the reasons is the fact that they do 60 to 70 hours a week for very little pay. The facilities that they have available to them are absolutely crap, frankly. They risk dangerous situations. It's not a safe job to be an HGV driver. They get very little reward from it. And you have organisations like the Road Haulage Association who want to bring in cheap labour from Europe. So rather than raising the salaries of these HGV drivers, rather than the industry itself taking control of the situation and trying to make things better for the HGV drivers in this country, they seem to be also passing the buck to the government. Isn't the government's responsibility to make sure that HGV companies, as are the companies, not the drivers, by the way, represented by this association, to make sure that they are actually taking care of their staff and making the industry appealing? Yes, there is more that the government could do, and certainly they have received warnings for years that there was a crisis coming in the logistics industry. But I don't think it's right to say that it's entirely the government's fault. Maybe they could have acted sooner. Maybe they could have come up with better solutions. There's also the issue of the DVLA and the DVSA, which are responsible for the tests and processing of applications. They have to bear some of the responsibility, though admittedly they couldn't do that properly because of COVID. I think it's wrong to blame it on COVID. I think that's public health policy that is to blame there. So in that sense, yes, you can pin that on the government somewhat, but it's not right to say this is entirely the government's fault.
I mean, the DVLA is operating worse than useless at the moment. I mean, you can take 10 months to get anything out of them, never mind getting them to answer the phone call. But Howard, let me ask you this, on top of what Emma just said, a lot of lorry drivers have been in touch with us here at Talk Radio to say that they're part of a problem, that they are seen as bad people because the climate change fanatics are hating anyone who drives around in a big diesel-powered truck. They hate the idea that these people are supposedly killing the planet. And so part of the reason they're treated so badly is because they're the sort of pariahs of society.
You're absolutely right, Mike. And I'm sorry to say I did agree with some of that, but not all of the stuff that you said. The point is, it's the RHA of not trying to get cheap labour. Their members, they want their staff to be looked after. It's a complete myth, that situation. What the RHA did was actually to recommend to have drivers from overseas to come in to help sort out with immediate crisis. But there's no way that a temporary visas for 3 months is going to be the solution, which is what the government suggested. Why would they want to come over here to earn, as you quite rightly say, cheap money and be integrated, poorly integrated into the actual logistics industry without actually getting some sort of incentive? That was ridiculous. And as far as the big demonisation, you're absolutely right, Mike. My daughter, she's 29. She drives a 40-ton truck and she drives for Ocado. And she loves the job, absolutely loves it. But she's fed up with being treated badly and fed up as a woman in terms of conditions, etc. That's not anything to do with the road haulage businesses. That's to do with the government and other like motorway service stations in France, for example. It's clean. It's almost like hotel facilities, and they can park up overnight for free. In this country, motorway service stations charge £50 for a truck to park up. We are in a mess, this country. Yes, HGV shortage is bad across Europe, but a lot of this is instigated by the EU, who put in certifications for asking drivers who've been driving for 30 years to do extra tests and ask them to pay for the privilege. So they decided to leave, especially over during COVID. It's a mess all round, and the government are very much instrumental in causing the problem.
And you do have to wonder, don't you, Emma, that if the EU is still influencing the way that we govern the people that drive on our roads, what on earth is going on?
Yeah, and I think that a point has been made about this before that I think is a fair one, which is one of the reasons why the wages were depressed in this country is partly because of the constant availability of cheap labour from Europe. So one of the reasons actually for wages potentially going up would be Brexit. But I think that it's totally right to say that one of the reasons why the haulage industry is in this crisis is because they're treated so badly. There was one driver who said that the shower facilities available to them aren't fit to wash a dog, that he wouldn't wash a dog in them, that they have to eat takeaway food. And as you say, you know, that in countries like France, the facilities are cheaper, they're better. But whose fault is that? That's not the government's fault. That's an issue within the industry that the industry needs to take control of, surely. So I don't think it's fair to say that that is something that the government have any control over. That's something surely that private companies need to get a hold of if they can't attract staff because the circumstances.
I'm sorry to butt in, but there's a thing called health and safety that the government controls, and those sorts of conditions, just genuine, decent human conditions, human rights conditions, all these sorts of things. Now, you get all these motorway service stations in this country and truck stops. They're not actually anything to do with road haulage businesses. They've been fighting like mad to get a situation where they're actually treated better and they have better facilities. It's nothing to do with them. It is totally due to the government, but not actually putting pressure on areas which would give these conditions better. I mean, and there lies the problem. The government only reacts. They are clueless to any. There's no long-term road user transport strategy. I've been talking to Mike for decades, it feels like, Mike, on the home of common sense. What are the government doing in terms of our road transport system? They don't care. They're focusing too much on Kermit the Frog green sound bites rather than what matters to the economy and voters' real life everyday needs.
Well, do you know, you both make an awful lot of sense. We're going to hear a bell now, and then we're going to decide exactly which one of you has won today's political punch-up. Now, unusually for me, I have not been convinced by either one of your arguments, but at the same time, I've also been convinced by both of them. So I think rather than just doing the same old and awarding one win and one loss, what I'm going to do is say this is a score draw, because I think you're both partly right. I think, yes, the government have got some blame, and I also think that the public have got some blame as well. What we can say for sure, Howard Cox, is that the road systems in this country need fixing big time, and I'd like to thank you for all the hard work you do. Emma, thank you very much indeed for joining us on today's political punch-up, and well done. We'll have to have a rematch next time. Well, that was great, wasn't it? I really enjoyed that. If you did, there's lots more like it. Have a look over here.